It's been a little over 6 months since Dying Light 2's release. They put out a handful of updates ranging from quality of life improvements like a photo mode, some additional things to do, New Game Plus, they introduced a new vendor, bounties, a new progression system, parkour challenges. A little while ago they tried addressing the sound and tweaking ragdoll physics. I believe in their last event that just recently ended, the Bloody Summer event, where the community had to dismember 3 million limbs in combat. During that event they also tweaked the dismemberment physics, which were a little bit more in line with Dying Light 1's dismemberment physics, which I know a lot of people wanted that since day one. It was one of those things that people considered a downgrade from the original. But however you slice, in the last 6 months, techland has been busy, and I'm sure it's even more crazy behind the scenes with the first major DLC quickly approaching. I mean, it's still 2 months out, but I'm sure the techland is quickly approaching. Anyways, I've been reading a lot of comments from Reddit, comment sections on YouTube, and even Steam reviews and what's said in the discussion tab over there. And I've been thinking about my own personal issues with this game. From what it sounds like, techland is playing it way too safe. And with it being 6 months already, how long do we really have to wait for this game to be what we expected at launch? How long until they can move resources from trying to make the game playable for everyone to start focusing on real major content additions? I also still see a lot of comments of people comparing the two games, which I get it, it's hard. The original set the tone, the precedent of what this brand new IP was meant to be. Survival horror with a major emphasis on melee-based combat, added fear and intensity at night, and the novelty of mixing in parkour movement into the combat in the form of drop kicking. I don't think many can argue that the second game missed the mark and falls short in some of these respects, but I think the comparisons of the original are a little bit too much. First off, the original launched with its own problems, and let's also not forget review copies were actually sent out late. For a brand new IP, that's never a good thing. It's then kind of ironic when you think about like a month before Dying Light 2 came out, they're already giving content creators and everybody review copies. Their idea of confidence in their product is very odd. The gold standard from the original should really be brought back down a little bit. Yes, it is great, and it's a game I still highly recommend, but it did take time to get to that gold standard that we hold it to. Second, the complaints of night and the lack of fear, I think, are a little bit misplaced. I'm sure the vibrant and bright night does have a part to play with the nights not being so intimidating, but the game also lacks ambient noises. There's no pipes being kicked and rolled by some unseen infected shambling down the street. There's no screams in the distance like in the first game. Those little subtle touches very much goes a long way, and it adds to those nights, which I'll circle back to in just a second. But truthfully, I'm also split on the vibrant nights myself. While I do miss the pitch black nights of Haran, old and new Villador have an aesthetic that's unique to Dying Light 2 and helps set its own identity. This game has systems and functions that techland can lean a little bit heavier into and blend a bit of nuances from their first game to help make it more of experience people wanted. Because personally, I keep reading a lot of I want a Dying Light 1.5 or Dying Light with a block button, but that's boring. And chances are, if we got Dying Light 1 with just a block button, most likely we would have complained why it took them 7 years to give us an expansion pack. Techland went out of their way to clearly define the parameters of this mutated virus, a world with survivors that have learned to live by these infected people, to be able to roam the streets and not challenge the dens of the sick at the height of the sun's apex, and yet it's frankly squandered. The infected have a bigger roster with much more variety introduced. They have a reason to be locked inside in the middle of the day with people supposed to roam and scavenge during the day, while the infected hide from the sun. Forgive the irony and tad bit of hypocrisy here, but the world does not feel alive. And I don't want to really compare the two games, but it's really hard to not think of how the infected from the original game really roamed out at night. There's a feeling of the world moving organically that's just completely absent from the sequel. Volatiles patrolling, fully capable of climbing up to rooftops completely on their own. They don't even have to spot you first. They walk around and do their own thing. You have biters completely capable of randomly transforming into a viral, climbing up buildings, and in the middle of a chase, a regular biter can also transform into a viral. Temporary, sure, but another aspect that's completely absent from the sequel. At Dying Light 2's heart, there's kind of a conflicting game design, and it makes you wonder if techland even has their own infected roles mapped out and how to properly utilize them. As of right now, it's almost like all the infected are just thrown in, and yet game logic, if you want to call it that, are so strong that it makes the world just feel lifeless and they're just throwing infected wherever they want. As an example, howlers don't move around. They're basically just stationary biological alarm systems. You might have a few suiciders or bombers around them and a couple spitters, and that's it. Volatiles do roam at night after a few updates now, but where you find them are pretty predictable. You also really don't find banshees randomly in areas. You can kind of guess where you're gonna find those, and goons are basically special events at night. That natural feeling of the world just being alive and all the infected doing their own thing is completely absent. And like I was saying with techland almost not having their infected roles mapped out, I'll give you another example of what I mean here. Biters, for example, are meant to move move slowly and be the weakest of the infected. They weren't able to get out of the sun's harmful UV rays quick enough, and their bodies basically deteriorated because they've been withering in the sun. They aren't that big of a threat on their own, but in a pack it's easy to become overwhelmed. This is something that's showed to us immediately in the first game once you're let out into the world. In Dying Light 2, we do see them on the streets, but they're scattered rather sparingly, and there are many streets you can go down where there's absolutely nothing. Plus, Villador is so much bigger, and you have so many other ways to maneuver now, it's still not that big of a deal. To me, it also doesn't make sense to have the streets so empty and have a good split of biters and storefronts, since the whole point of them deteriorating like that is exactly like I said. They weren't able to get out of the sun quick enough. I get it from a gameplay perspective to make dark hollows and storefronts basically viral hives could be annoying, but once you have UV lamps upgraded, even volatiles aren't that much of a threat. And isn't the whole point of going in during the day a risk versus reward type of thing? Why not double down on the virals and maybe add in a special infected like a volatile or rampager? And to make things even more interesting, why not make the GRE hospitals, dark zones, and storefronts require a flashlight? Make them absolutely pitch black with an occasional flicker of the light to cast an intimidating shadow on the wall. Add in some eerie noises and some intense ambient music, stuff that's actually unique to each location. I think something like this would bring a little bit of that fear factor from that original game that so many people want, while also not sacrificing that vision, those new mechanics, those new systems that techland implemented with the sequel. But like usual, stuff like this is really just a conversational piece. Let me know what you guys think. Where are you at with the Dying Light 2? Are you waiting for that major DLC to drop for you to hop back in? Have you been playing these events? Do you wish that Dying Light 2 is basically Dying Light 1 with a block button? Let's talk. In the meantime, feel free to check out any of my other videos, or if you're brand new to the channel, maybe hitting that subscribe button.